If you are currently living in Barcelona or plan to move to Barcelona, housing can feel impossible right now. And that is because some new laws were passed in 2023 that actually made housing so much harder than easier. The government passed laws in 2023 because after COVID, there was a lot of housing issues, especially with prices going up and up, with a lot more people traveling post COVID. I am going to go through some of those rules and some of the fees. So if you're planning to move here or are living here, you know more of your rights. Because as I've done more research and having to go through a lot of apartments here, actually a lot of people are not aware that they have all these rights and that these rules actually apply. And sadly, the government kind of ignores a lot of them, which is what makes it kind of hard. But at least you kind of know your options and know what you're in for when you're moving here or planning to move apartments. Since 2021, prices have significantly increased in rent post-COVID. There was a lot of people traveling after COVID because they wanted to get out and about again, and that made rental prices just really expensive in a lot of places, especially outside of the US, because a lot of Americans were traveling and trying to get out because it was just getting more and more expensive for the US especially. But because of all the tourists coming to Barcelona and Spain, Europe in general, a lot of prices have gone up, especially for locals, and their salaries have not increased the same. So it's made housing a lot harder. So they passed a lot of laws differentiating between short-term and long-term leasing in Spain. So in Spain, a short-term lease is 11 months or less, and a long-term lease is normally around 5-ish years. And they normally contain clauses to get out earlier after a couple of years, sometimes with penalties, some not, depending on the type of lease you have. What also makes housing hard in Barcelona is that depending on what visa your status is, you can only get certain types of leases. So if you have a visa that only time here for a couple of years, let's say digital nomad visa, which is 1 to 3 years, you can only get a short-term lease. You cannot get a 5-term lease because they know that with your visa, you can only stay 3 years. You know, you can renew it, but the term is there. And if you are an EU citizen, you pretty much cannot get a short-term lease because you're legally allowed to stay here. So you can only get a long-term lease. So it just makes it 10 times harder to get certain types of leases, even if you want to stay, you know, let's say forever, keep renewing your lease and eventually try to get a long-term visa, you cannot get that type of housing. So there are different laws that they have enacted for short-term and long-term leases. Long-term leases, they have become a lot stricter, which has made a lot of companies and owners not want to do long-term leases. One of the biggest things with long-term leases that they have done is that the owner, landlord, if they are getting a new contract with the new person, they are only allowed to increase rent a certain percentage. So based in from 2023 until now, the current leases, the owner is only allowed to increase the rent 3%. So let's say the last, for a 1 bedroom, the last person who was renting had a really nice place for, 750 euros a month. The next lease that they give another 5-term lease for, they could only increase it 3%, which is kind of low for what current housing is right now, depending on what neighborhood you're in and everything like that. But that is a really big thing. So a lot of places and owners, agencies also, they want to increase the prices even more. So they don't want to do long-term leases as much anymore because then they're really limited on how much they can increase it. The government did this because they obviously want to try to keep prices lower and not jack them up, especially for locals and people who live here long-term for the longer leases, because it's just going to make it almost impossible to be able to afford any other type of housing. And when you do this type of long-term lease, sign a new contract, the owner actually has to tell you and show you, put in the contract what the previous rent was so that they can prove that they did not increase it over a certain percentage. This has made long-term leases even harder to get, which also too, depending on your visa status and what passport you have, can make it harder because even if, let's say, there's someone from Germany coming here and they just want to come here for 1 year, let's say to live here to try it out, they can't get a short-term lease because they can stay longer and the landlords are worried about them squatting after the short-term lease period. So they have to do a long-term lease. But now short-term And well, the long-term leases are even harder to get. So most people who are coming here, at least for their first couple years, are pretty much going to be stuck with a short-term lease unless you're an EU citizen or working for a Spanish company. So short-term leases are in super high demand. Rent is really going up in the short-term leases, which has made it really difficult for a lot of people and students, regular people living here to be able to afford it and to make it affordable for locals as well. This has really made the housing for students a lot better because they know international students will pay a lot more money than, let's say, somebody like myself who wants to stay here long term and live here and pay a reasonable price. Part of the reason I left the US was because of how much housing and apartments were. But now we're getting closer to prices that are similar to the US, which is just astronomical. That is why a lot of people also, it's very common to share here, kind of no matter your age, because it's just more affordable. And also with the housing laws and stuff, renting a room versus renting a whole apartment, a lot of times you don't have to have all those visa requirements and this and that. You can just come here, let's say rent a room for 3 months and then have to find a new place. You don't have to do kind of all these other things that are required there. For short-term leases, also a big problem here are agency fees. This is a big problem we've run into, and that's why I've been doing all this research and actually reading the laws, because I'm like, okay, I'm a lawyer. Let me actually do my research and see what is happening. So actually short-term leases and long-term leases too, depending on, the owner situation. If they own more than one property, then this is going to apply to them, which is 99% of what is getting leased out there. Is they can actually not charge the tenant the agency fees. The agency fees are paid by the owner, the landlord. But it is very common for agencies here and a lot of big cities in Spain to charge that to the tenant plus VAT fees, no matter what your visa status is. And this is actually very illegal, but with the research I've done, the government doesn't enforce it. There are websites where you can Google and report all these agencies and what they're doing, but sadly the government doesn't do anything about it. But legally, you don't have to pay those agency fees. And they're really high. So 11 months a lease, a short-term lease, a lot of agencies will charge 2 months agency fees, which is non-refundable. You won't get it back. Plus 21% VAT, which is another 1 to 2 months. So you're paying 4 months in fees, possibly, for an 11-month lease that you'll never get back. So it pretty much puts your rent at 1.5 times what you thought it was. And a 2-month deposit is normally very common here, but you normally get that back at the end minus a cleaning fee or any damages or things like that. But if you go and ask the agency, well, can you prove that, this owner, only owns this property and that's it, or that this is illegal, they normally will just stop responding to you. That's happened to us a lot. I'm like, okay, well, if you're going to charge this, can you prove that, these charges are legal or not? And they're like, oh, well, that's just how it works in Spain. No, that is not just how it is, how it works, but it's not legal. So you can go and ask your questions, but however, they know they have the upper hand, the agencies, because people want to live here. And there's tons of students. There's a lot of housing available for high prices. And they know that, sadly. So that's just kind of how it is here, but they're not legal. I don't know how the legal system is here in regards to if you pay this and then you don't know it's illegal and then go to the contract, figure out it is, and then try to get that money back. I'm not sure exactly how that process works here in Spain or what the rules are around, trying to get your money back or things like that. But sadly, in Barcelona specifically, and I'm sure other big cities in Spain, housing here is just really hard. There's a lot of illegal stuff that goes on, so you really have to be careful. Don't, give any money without seeing a place in person first. Make sure you read the actual contract. The only fees that are legal that the agency could possibly charge you is that if they actually file the contract with the government, the lease, it's around, I think, 125 or 150 euros. So that is very reasonable because that is a cost to them if they do it legally. But you'll see there's a lot of illegal agencies here and they won't file anything. They won't have contracts and you really have to be careful and make sure you get everything in writing. There are local organizations here that help out with housing. However, if you don't speak Spanish or Catalan, they're going to be extremely hard to work with. So go with somebody, if you do need the help, who a friend or a colleague or somebody who does speak Spanish or Catalan, so they can help translate, because most of the people working at these local organizations don't speak English. Just so you know ahead of time, if you do have to go through that process. I've had so many friends here. We've had lots of issues with not getting deposit money back. Apartments don't exist. They don't have the keys. Like, you really have to be careful, do your due diligence and things like that. And another problem you might run into too, if you ask questions here, a lot of locals find that offensive. They're just like, oh, trust me, this won't be this and that. Because I've had friends who, they get picked for the apartment and then they ask questions on the lease, like, what are these charges? What are they going to be? They can find you difficult and just let you go. And I think they can legally do that here. They kind of have a little more, they can just deny you for whatever reason because they don't like you. That's okay. That, you can't do that in the US. But here in Spain, it's very common, and I think it is legal because it does happen a lot, and they just have the pick and choose of what they want, sadly. Overall, I hope this video helps anyone who is currently living here or is planning to move to Spain and really frustrated with the housing situation. It's really hard for everybody, locals and non-locals. These new laws that were passed sadly don't help at all. They've just made housing more and more difficult and more expensive, because short-term leases, they don't have a rental cap, meaning they can increase it as much as they want. And because there is such a high demand right now for Spain and Barcelona and a lot of places in Europe, the rent prices are really going up and up. But it's good to be aware of the agency fees and the illegality of them. If you Google it yourself, you can get a lot more specific information. I just kind of wanted to give generalities to inform other people, because as I've been going through this process again, trying to find apartments through agencies and all the fees and everything, finding out it's actually all illegal and what they're doing is illegal, and it's really a corrupt system. And that's just kind of how it is here, but at least so you know what you're getting into, what you might have to pay for, and things like that. So the best way, if you can, is to go through private owners, but sadly that's super small pool as well. But it is very difficult here, and that's why there's so much discourse online with Airbnbs and things like that. I think that is an issue, but I don't think hotels are any better, because hotels are just make it more expensive than Airbnb. I think that's why Airbnb got to be so popular, because the standard hotel, I think they said in Barcelona, is about 150 euros a night. So if you're here for a month, that's like 4,000 euros. Versus you could get an Airbnb, let's say for 1,500 or 2,000 euros a month, is a much better price. So I don't think that's a huge issue. I think it's the government and the locals who own these apartments who are trying to get as much money as they can from international people or just other people living and moving here. So it's very difficult. I can do some more follow-up videos if you guys want with more specific information. This is just kind of the overall generalities. I did have to, of course, translate all the law because I am not fluent in Spanish and Catalan. But that's just kind of what I had, and you can do a lot of research on your own as well and kind of figure that out. But it is difficult. Expect it to be difficult when you move here. Give yourself a good couple of months to find an apartment. If you find something sooner, you're really lucky, but expect to need a couple of months minimum to find a place. Normally when you find an apartment, they want you to move in within a couple weeks or so, so that can move very fast. But the actual process of finding the apartment, signing a contract, sending all the money, requirements, visa stuff does take time to find something. And depending on when you're coming, students normally, they pay a lot more, at the start of the school years, and also summer, a ton of people, tourists, everybody, come and travel here. So that is definitely going to make prices higher, versus if you sign a lease or find a contract in the winter, is definitely a lot better price and much more affordable. Still expensive, but more affordable too. I hope this video helps, and I will see you guys next time.